Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Shindig and Archaeology podcast brought to you by the Red River Archaeology Group. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Horn, and we've got a brilliant episode for you today. It's one of my great friends, Adam Parsons of Oxford Archaeology.
There's just something about the images of people in the past, those reconstruction drawings of people, Roman soldiers and things like that, just really inspired me, really.
A lot of you may know Adam from his amazing outreach online, especially to do with his reproduction early medieval artifacts.
Because it means that students can study these sorts of things and look at how they would have looked and how these objects would have behaved when they were intact and not crumbly.
But did you know that he's also like the most amazing archaeological illustrator with his day-to-day job at Oxford Archaeology?
But sometimes the corrosion is so bad that actually you need to use a combination of, a drawing and then a interpretive overlay and maybe X-rays in conjunction with it. And those sorts of things can really help to bring out the features you're trying to describe.
So listen to this podcast. It's about Adam's life in archaeology and also the amazing early medieval outreach, reproduction, TikTok work that he does. So yeah, do enjoy. Okay, so Adam, you spent your whole life in archaeology. As we know, it's usually a fabulously well-paid job. Apart from the money and the glamour, what was it that brought you into it in the first place, and why have you stayed in it for so long?
I don't know if I'm brutally honest. I do remember visiting a lot of castles and things like that as a kid with my parents, and always being quite enthused by that. And I particularly remember at primary school looking at books on ancient Greece and ancient Rome, illustrated by Peter Connolly, who I rather fortunately got to meet later on in my career at a conference, and was a lovely man. But there's just something about the images of people in the past, those reconstruction drawings of people, Roman soldiers and things like that, that just really inspired me, really. And I suppose that's where it started, a little bit of my parents enjoying history and a little bit of those core textbooks as a kid, things like that.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's kind of like if we're lucky enough to have a parent or a guardian or a relative or even an elder sibling that has that interest, and it kind of gets passed on. I think it's quite interesting with the way your career has gone, and we'll be discussing later about reenactment and reproductions, that it was almost like you went to these sites and you kind of saw the reconstructions and you enjoyed the archaeology, but you kind of as much, if not more, enjoyed how people were interpreting them sort of visually as well. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember some of the first things I did was make myself knight suits of armor out of cardboard and things like that. Like I think there's that impulse in us, all of us. We respond to things in different ways when we're enthused about them. And mine was definitely my first response was to draw it and make it and try and reconstruct it. And it was those images that captured me. So perhaps it's no surprise, with the benefit of hindsight, to see where that was leading. So.
I think our listeners now have to realise that if hopefully you'll be looking at Adam's web pages, and we'll give all the addresses to that later on. You can understand now what drives him and why he does what he does, and that's a really interesting insight because I didn't know. I know Adam fairly well, but I didn't think that he'd be standing at these interpretation boards that you see, say at sites at Hadrian's Wall, whatever, and you see the reconstructions, and that was the thing that really stole us at young Adam's imagination. But I think also the interesting aspect is Adam's a very, very skilled illustrator, and he's worked for many years. He works for Oxford Archaeology. His principal job, correct me if I'm wrong, is an illustrator, but you also edit. You also do lots of other things in terms of outreach. But it's illustration really, because we've not talked to an illustrator before on this podcast. So I think you always get that idea. I mean, obviously, I worked as an archaeologist as you have yourself, and you were told to, really sort of begin that interpretation process at the trowel's edge. And I suppose, I really want to think, as an illustrator, what's your philosophy when, how much interpretation, are you allowed in your job? I think you told me once about you had a sort of particular way that because you worked as an archaeologist for so long as well as an illustrator, you kind of know what aspects are important. So I don't know if you can just expand upon, if you get an object to draw, what are you sort of looking for, and what are you maybe looking to emphasize? Maybe the wrong word. You can choose your own words for that, just to bring it out, so in report people can actually understand what's going on with that particular artifact.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's as you said, it stems from that initial impulse of wanting to see the thing reconstructed and recreated, and that in itself is a natural extension of wanting to understand how the thing was made and how the thing was used. So I suppose if I was to sum up one philosophy behind it all, it would be artifact biography, which is something all archaeologists have heard about, which is this idea that an object was made by somebody in a particular way and has been used by potentially various people in particular ways and deposited in a particular way. And those things will leave marks on that object throughout its journey. And so understanding that is where illustration starts, really. Yes, you can draw, but actually what the drawing is supposed to do is bring out those features. So I'll be looking at, features from the manufacture, casting marks, file marks, things like that. And it'll be my job to sort of emphasize those features so they become visible, but also de-emphasize things like corrosion, because they can often get in the way, because you'll often hear, why don't you just take a photograph? Oh, well, we do sometimes. But sometimes the corrosion is so bad that actually you need to use a combination of, a drawing and then a interpretive overlay and maybe X-rays in conjunction with it. And those sorts of things can really help to bring out the features you're trying to describe. Because things aren't always as nice as the sort of the type object in a museum on a case that's perfectly preserved. Often the artifacts we deal with are in a lot worse condition and need a little bit of help, should we say.
Well, that's really interesting, because I know that you did a lot of work on sort of waterlogged Roman wood, I think, and I can imagine some of them wouldn't have been in the best condition, or they were perhaps going to deteriorate fairly quickly. So I suppose there's an aspect of having to record the marks on that before they potentially faded. Obviously, there'd be preservation going on there as well, but I was fascinated to learn that you spent about 2 years, having the immense privilege of recording these waterlogged Roman artifacts. Could you tell us a little bit about that site and some of the finds that you were
Yeah,
drawing?
yeah. I mean, I actually started working drawing the waterlogged wooden parts of that when I was my last year of university, as a part-time job, and then subsequently went on to work on all the artifacts from this site. So it's about 2 years in total that I just spent drawing finds from this site.
Which
Um,
site was it? Can you reveal, as it were?
it was the Millennium Project in Carlisle, which was a large excavation just in front of the castle today, and it kind of goes under the road too. So there was some trenches that are now in the bypass, and which is part of a new gallery in Tully House, which today displays the finds. Um, Again, it comes back to that same philosophy. You could sit down and draw the piece of wood, and it would be a lovely drawing, but actually, what are you supposed to be looking at? And fundamentally, to draw a piece of wood properly, you need to understand how trees grow, how different species of trees grow, and then how people use different tools to manufacture things from them. So you need to understand about how, different trees, such as an oak tree, will have large medullary rays, which are the rays that come out from the center of the tree, and they leave a characteristic patterning on the wood. And how in the past people would split these radially, which is to say out from the center, like you'd cut a normal cake up really into little wedges. So that's how wood was chopped up in the past. Whereas today we will slice a tree tangentially, which is much more like you'd cut a Christmas cake up or a wedding cake into those weird little slivers. And once you start to understand how the tree grows and how it's been cut up, you can start to understand the marks you're seeing on the surface from these processes. You'll also see saw marks. You'll start to recognize the difference between axe and adze marks. So really what you're understanding is how the tree's grown and how the tree's then been cut down. And it's just your job as an illustrator to then put the pencil to the paper and explain that process, really. Again, it's
I
just
suppose
seen as a drawing process, but it's not really. It's an interpretive process, just exactly as you said about, getting all that information onto the page. It's about, just in the same way a paragraph of text may communicate an idea, a drawing is supposed to communicate some ideas or some processes. So
well, that you've given us a beautiful quotation for posting about this on social media, so you're doing your job. Thank you. But It was interesting there that you said that you were talking about pencil to paper, but now a lot of it is digital. And I suppose there's a lot of people maybe interested in doing this as a career. How have I'm old enough to say computers, science computers. How have they changed the way that you go around your job, or is it always you start with the sort of the pencil and paper, and then you scan and digitize, or do you now start digitally, and just a little bit about that process as it is
Yeah,
today?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not particularly. I mean, I'm philosophically driven rather than process driven, which means that I will keep at core the philosophy I've talked about in terms of explaining the artifact. So I don't particularly care what medium I use, other than I'll try and pick the medium that is both best to display the thing I want to show and also quickest. Because obviously, the more faster we can do things, the more things we can do, or the better things we can do. Which means for something like perhaps a wooden artifact, I would still use pen and ink. Old-fashioned ink pens that have to fill up manually and get nibs clogged. Same with lithics, just because I am faster and more accurate at relaying the information I need to using those. For something like pottery, Roman pottery, it's now partly pencil drawing because there's some basic geometry involved in reconstructing a pot itself. But then after that process, I'll go entirely digital. I'll scan it in, and I'll go into Adobe Illustrator we use and reflect the pot and reconstruct the pot digitally that way. The actual plans themselves, I mean, as well as the artifacts, there's plans on site. Most of that now is entirely digital, to the point where there's very little drawings done on site anymore. So, it's one of those things where I think you choose your tool depending on the outcome you need, really. And today it's very much a mixed medium, particularly for myself.
And how many years? I mean, one doesn't like to ask an illustrator their age in terms of their career, but how many
Blush.
years? Adam's 21. He's packed a lot
Yeah.
in a short time on this earth. How many years then have you been illustrating? Because did you get into that fairly early when you started your work in commercial archaeology?
Yeah, I mean, it was technically the role I applied for with Oxford Archaeology in Lancaster was the illustrator job back in 2002. I think I started, so that's 21 years now. Now, obviously, that role has developed out from illustration into a number of other strands, but it still remains the core of my work, illustration. So yeah, quite a while. But I had been doing it prior to that too. Again, I was doing the recording the wood prior to that, and I'd actually been volunteering at Carlisle Archaeology Limited in Carlisle prior to that too, just helping out. I worked out quite early on that actually archaeologists had to do a lot of stuff in December on rainy sites, on watching briefs in fields in the middle of nowhere, and the illustrator got to sit in a warm office with coffee, and people brought the finds to them already cleaned. So I was like, I see what's happening with this game. So that was definitely a racket that I was looking to get into.
So there you go, kids. Listen to your Uncle Adam. Stay inside with a nice warm drink, and
Yeah,
just complain slightly if people give you something that's a bit too muddy.
yeah. I mean, you do miss out on those amazing digs, amazing sites
Yeah.
in the middle of summer. But as we all know, that isn't everything we do, is it?
No, in commercial archaeology, it's very little
No.
often of what we do. But we do it because we love the archaeology, and
Yep.
the construction happens all year round. So we're happy to do it, and we'll complain about it a little bit on these podcast people, but
Mhm.
yeah, we do love it, and I don't know if necessarily we do it for free, as I tend to say in this podcast, but
Mhm.
it is a vocation, and I think that's what
Yep.
Adam's saying, that it's something he's done, and he does out with. He does it beyond his day-to-day job in archaeology, as do I. It's just something that we love. And I mean, it's interesting that Adam has now worked in this for over 21 years, and you must have come across some spectacular artifacts. Well, I know for a fact you have, with some of the publications we'll be talking about later, because Adam, you may or may not know this, is if you're on a site and you see something, particularly if it's early medieval and it's a kind of lump of iron, what you tend to do is you ask around the site and say, can we ask Adam yet? And then you'll sort of say, okay, yeah, we can send this. We'll send it to Adam, and he'll get, I'm sure, out the blue, he'll just get a photo taken on a wet and windy site somewhere with a lump of iron, with somebody asking him, Adam, do you know what this is? Does that happen then a lot, and is it something that's happened in this last year? So I think it was about a year ago I sent you the
Yeah,
last
some
thing that
stuff from
I
yeah.
sent you. You can just tell us a little bit more about that aspect. This sort of, I suppose I'm asking about the experience that you built up, and maybe just, you know, one artifact that you've got either emailed in or either through your work or through someone you know that you've gone, wow, this is something really important. This is something that, you know, not only what I'd love to draw, but I just love to hold, just to see that
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, I mean, partly, again, it's as you said, it's vocational. So as well as having a job with Oxford Archaeology, doing this, it's something I do in my own time too. You know, we'll come on to other stuff later, but that means you absorb yourself in the things you want. Now, whilst my paid job will focus on certain aspects because that's my role, the brilliant thing about the other vocational elements of it is I can pick and choose what it is I do. And I've always had an interest in the early medieval period. So I would go to museums, read stuff, make stuff, engage in that, which means that just over time you accumulate an awful lot of knowledge about that period. And as a result, you have this kind of library of stuff in your brain. And again, because my impulse has always been very much the visual world and object biographies and, you know, making copies of these artifacts, that means that this sort of stuff is lodged in my brain. So when people send me them, it's almost like there's some kind of file of facts I'm rummaging through, thinking I've seen one of those somewhere. And sometimes that involves scrabbling around a book. And eventually you think, I have seen one like that before. And then you get the text back within 10 minutes going, it looks like one of these, I think, you know,
Yeah.
and then 20 minutes later, you might get a reference when I eventually found it in the book, you know. So,
I think people have got to understand that, you know, we're waiting around those 10 minutes. We're not actually digging that stage. Everyone's
no,
thinking, Adam says
we're
this is
doing,
Roman. You may as
there's
well go home.
dots,
Not
there's
not that
dots,
we
what
don't
is
love Roman,
typing?
but
Yeah,
if we're meant to be on an early medieval site and Adam says, well, that's clearly Iron Age or Roman, then we're like, oh.
yeah. But like I
But
said, I mean, I've
yeah.
got to. I mean, I've had an incredible. It's difficult, really. I've had an incredibly privileged career in that I seem to have landed some really interesting early medieval sites. And you know, the Millennium site was absolutely fantastic in terms of the preservation things there. Things like wooden Roman rulers. Fairly recently, I got a random picture. I can't really talk about the site much yet of a early medieval comb, 6th, 7th century comb sent through Antler one with somebody saying, what date is this? And of course, you get horrifically excited because it's the correct period, as we all know. You know, the answer you all
I will
want.
stretch to 9th and 10th century, but you know, there are earlier centuries are just about okay.
Yeah, I've got to say, I have kind of had a bracket that spreads out from the sort of late 9th, early 10th century, and the further it gets away from that, the less interesting it gets. But you know, it's all pretty good. It's all pretty good.
We'll edit this out so we don't lose that big 11th to 12th, 13th century audience. But no, but that's the thing. I think people who are interested in, say, you know, we do a lot of work in an anarchy period site with University of Bristol, and I didn't know anything about it, but even just reading the blogs and the images that were coming from that, you begin to get into it. And that's the thing about archaeology. You think, oh, I'm never interested in modern
Yep.
stuff or medieval stuff, and then when someone tells you about an interesting site and you saw a few pictures and you visit a site or a museum, it will start. It will always find its way in. Anyone can get into archaeology and history if you just need to have the right people telling you about it. And with Adam here today, we've certainly got that. I think I can see from your passion in this that this is a good chance to go into the final part of our podcast, which is your ability in terms of yourself and the Cumberland group that you've set up with your friends and colleagues, to tell people like myself, people that are watching and listening to this now. So could you just tell everybody about what your group is? We can direct people to the websites and they can find out how it
Sure.
started. But if you just tell us, you know, what you want to achieve, what you do and the amazing outreach that you do at places like Govan, and you do personally with your videos and online. And yeah, if you just spend a few minutes telling us about that, and then we can
Sure.
we can thank you. But yeah, Cumberland, tell us about that, and tell us that everything you guys and you do personally about outreach.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been obviously reenacting for as long as I've been doing archaeology, so those two things have gone side by side for me. So it's always something I've done. But it was around the time of two things kind of happened together. Around the time of us publishing Cumwhitten, the finds went into a museum. So that was a period whereby, having made reproduction artifacts for a lot of years, I realized that I was going to have to do something for the museum, because they wanted reproductions and I couldn't face the idea of somebody else making them, if I'm brutally honest. So I decided I'd have to formalize a business side of what I do. But then shortly after, at the same time, I started changing what I was doing from a reenactment point of view to emphasize this about the Northwest. So first of all, I started up my sort of sideline business, which is Blue Oaks Reproductions, and I made replicas for Tully House, and I started making a number of replicas for handling kits and things like that. In addition, with the reenactment group, I eventually found a group of like-minded individuals, and we created a new reenactment group called Cumberland, as you say. And that was very much to represent the peoples of the early medieval Northwest, particularly focused around the idea of the nascent kingdom of Strathclyde and its environs. So we're not a Viking reenactment group. We're not a Brythonic reenactment group. We just look to represent the people and their lives in the region, using Cumberland as a quite convenient marker, because it seems to straddle the areas of our members who live mixed across the border of northwest England and southwest Scotland. And so that was our emphasis. And as a result of that, we've been involved in lots of events. So, for example, when we launched the book at St. Michael's, we did an event there. I got involved in the Viking Festival at Heysham and did a number of talks there, hosted talks and then do some outreach. And of course, we developed a relationship with Govan, which is, we had, technically you and I had met earlier, but that was when we first properly got to know each other. Because you likewise were doing a lot of volunteer work and stuff there. And for us, it was really important to have a good relationship with Govan, because that is ground zero really for our project. It's home base alpha basically, as far as we're concerned, in that that's where some of this exciting research. It's a nice place to have as a base, and we've developed a great relationship there. So what we aim to do with both my business and the reenactment is to make high quality reproduction items and use them in a very well-informed way to enthuse people and excite people about the past, really. And so if you turn up at Govan, it's a fantastic place to visit, with some amazing sculpture there and really good volunteers and guides you can go and take. But if we're there as well, it allows people to look at the clothes and the art and the stuff that is missing from that, and see how people wove cloth, and see how people forged things, or see how people carved things, and to have some of these discussions we're having now in a really accessible way. And it's the same with the museum work. We put these artifacts on display so that a crumbled thing in a case that we're all getting really excited about, and a lot of people are looking a little bit nonplussed, if you can put a reproduction next to it and some interesting interpretation, then suddenly that brings it to life for them, and they can start to see what they're looking at and understand that a little bit more.
And you're doing this as well with your Blue Axe Reproductions is Adam's company, and we'll put links out to that too. If you search on Facebook, that's probably the best place to find about your reproduction work.
Yeah.
And you've made amazing handling kits, and I've seen them for Govan, but also for also museums, did you say, but also universities as well. So a little bit about those kits.
Yeah, I mean, I've done the two largest ones are probably for the University of Nottingham and the University of Glasgow, which both tailored very differently. The University of Nottingham was very much tailored around the Viking Age artifacts from the East Midlands and how that material culture looks, and the University of Glasgow one was very much geared around the areas we've been talking about, the Northwest Insular sort of world, really. So it's that Scandinavian, Northwest Insular style stuff, and it's you could buy a stock Viking handling kit and you would have a fairly repetitive comb and blah, 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 blah. But these are catered to specific finds with a high level of accuracy, which is really interesting because it means that students can study these sorts of things and look at how they would have looked and how these objects would have behaved when they were intact and not crumbly. But you can also put them side by side and see just the kind of styles and trends in objects that come out, because there are some similarities. Of course there are. That's true of most of the world. There are things that are very similar across the whole of Europe today, but there are some things that are really interesting and idiosyncratic to the area too, and it enables those things to be brought out and people to actually pick up a pair of Viking scales and some weights and some hack silver and have a go at weighing it and how accurate it is, and things like that. Really, it's have a go at spinning, have a go at weaving, feel how comfortable the shoes are, see the difference between them. I have a little exercise where I get the belts out, which I've mentioned earlier, and I will lay some of the insular style belts on the table with some other belts from around Europe at the time, and I often get even school kids to separate those belts out into groups that they think look similar. And then they group them together in, oh, these ones look like this and these ones look like that. And they all have different criteria. But in effect, what they're doing is what archaeologists do. They're making a typology. That's all a typology is. And so it provides a really interesting talking point for the kids to do a fun activity, to have a look at them, to discuss their ideas, and then talk about how actually this is what archaeologists do in a slightly more developed way. And we bring dating and other objects into, to create ideas about how people made things, how people used things in the past. And, you'll be a fan of Durhams. For example, they're another great talking point. If you bring a replica Durham out and give them a load of coins and ask them to separate them out and have a look at the inscriptions on them, that's always one that makes them go, what's this? This is nothing like any of the other ones. Well, that's a fantastic introduction to talking about the wider world that Scandinavia was connected to, stretching out to the Middle East and beyond, so it's that's what reproductions are best used for me, is just this point where people can actually handle it and get enthused about the subject and use that as a talking point, a springboard to the wider world, and just how far that actually stretches really, and how much there is to learn out there still.
And if you want to know more from Adam, I'll TikTok, you're on YouTube,
Yep.
Facebook, any other links, just so that people can.
I was going to say you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. On all of those, it's at Blue Axe Reproductions, or one word, except Twitter, which is at eBlueAxe, cos character length. But yeah, I've got a website as well, but websites are always horrifically out of date. But the website does have links to social media, so that's blueaxereproductions.com. So yeah, go and have a look, see all the shiny things being used, being made, etc., etc.
And I think, it just remains for me to say thank you. Luke will often say to me, he can tell, he's he knows the best about archaeology, but he says he really knows something interesting when I'm sort of agape. When you're telling me stuff that I maybe have heard a bit about, but the way you describe it with your enthusiasm is something that comes across in your social media. And you write, edit books, you illustrate, you've worked with Oxford Archaeology for say over 20 years now. So we work in commercial archaeology, as do you, but we're all interested in, we're so fascinated, we just want other people to know about it, and we want to share that huge interest that we have in it. And I think you'll all agree that there's few better than Adam and in doing that for us as a commercial archaeology world, to tell the world how brilliant archaeology is, and particularly in the sort of northwest of Britain and the Irish Sea region, and whatever you want to call it. So thank you very much, and so goodbye, Adam, and hopefully we'll speak again.
No, thanks very much for having me. Cheers, Tom.
Yeah, as you would have suspected, Adam was great. He was great in what he was talking about, great in his delivery, just a really nice person. I think that's come across in a lot of the people. I think everyone we've talked to has just been really nice, really knowledgeable, loves their subject. As a sort of producer, is that come across as a sort of non-archaeologist, although you're becoming an archaeologist?
One of us. Yeah, I do think it's always impressive to me to see how much people care. That's the thing that I know I've said it a few times on this, but the actual passion, the enthusiasm that you guys have for your work is incredible, and I would listen to it all day. Whether I know about the subject or I don't know about the subject, it doesn't matter. Hearing two people talk about something they love is always interesting to me. And it just so happens that Adam is also a very interesting person, has an interesting story, and that's great for me to have to sit through this 100 times and edit it. It's always interesting, but I think it's amazing for our viewers, for our listeners as well, to not only hear Adam talk about that this is his work, but that it bleeds into his personal life as well, with his with the reproductions, and that kind of stuff as well. It encompasses his whole life, basically. This, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean he's a good pal, and I had the pleasure of spending a weekend with him making reproduction Viking items, and it's just working with a friend who's so knowledgeable and such a good teacher. And as we know, teachers should be paid more because it's such a difficult job. Because if you can remain calm and patient while I'm sort of bashing a bit of silver very, very badly in your workshop, then you've got the patience of a saint. But that's it. You're talking there about it's his life, and the Cumberland group that we're talking about just at the end, and the reproductions, the handling kits that he makes for universities. So the next generation of archaeologists are being able to handle things that otherwise it's behind a glass case and you just can't touch it. So to sound like MC Hammer. But it was fantastic. And also, I mean, huge thanks. I'm sure you'll share out to Oxford Archaeology for lending Adam. And I think that's what we're trying to do, trying to show that commercial archaeology, we're all archaeologists, we all love it. We want, rising tide will lift all boats, and collaborative work like this on outreach is, I think something that I'm probably most proud of that you and I have done today.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just down to getting somebody as busy as Adam to come and talk to us, it's incredible. I always say this is about sharing stories. This is about sharing people's lives, and that's what we're here to do, and that's what we love to do. And with that in mind, stay tuned, because we may have Adam back.
Yes, 2 weeks from now. So as you know, it's every 2 weeks the podcast drops, and it will be hinted towards, I think, maybe in this podcast, but basically the next episode is going to be a special on Adam's work with Oxford Archaeology on Viking and Viking Age graveyards. Amazing.
How do you feel about Vikings, Tom? Would you like to tell us?
I've heard of them. I'm going to read more. I think there are legs in it in terms of my interest. But yeah, I'm on Wikipedia straight after this and find out more. But yeah, joking aside, if you like Vikings, if you like early medieval Britain and Ireland, if you like burials, amazing burials, furnished burials from a Viking cemetery, this is the podcast to listen to. It's amazing. Luke's going to do some wizardry on getting the YouTube version of this. It's going to have images. So it's going to be something new that we're doing, and we hope you enjoy it. But yeah, stay tuned 2 weeks from now for this second part of a sort of Adam Parsons special.
Absolutely. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button to get this directly to you when it comes out next. It's not one to be missed. So pay attention to us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, because we'll be dropping some hints coming up over the next 2 weeks, and a couple of teasers about this podcast coming up. As always, leave us a rating, leave us a review, tell your friends about this podcast, share the stories worldwide, because that's what we're trying to do. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much.